Okay, good morning. So we're up to Siman Reish Beis Halacha Beis Sif Beis. We're talking about Birchas HaPeres, the brachos we make on various fruits. Says the Mechaber, Haboiser, which means unripe grapes. Kol zman shelo higia likpul halavon, so long as they're so unripe, they're so sort of immature, they haven't reached the development stage of kpul halavon, some sort of white bean. Mevarech halav beri priadama. They haven't yet got the status of a grape to make it a beri pri'etz, but rather you make a bracha of beri priadama. Mishehu kapul halavon, but once it's reached that stage of kapul halavon, ve'elech mevarech halav beri pri'etz. From then on, you make a bracha of beri pri'etz. Nowadays, we don't really know the exact stage of when the grape gets to this point. We always make a ber priadama, we err on the side of caution, until it's become large, in other words, is developed into a proper grape. But when it comes to other fruits, not grapes, once the fruit has emerged, you can make a ber pri'etz. I offered, so long as it's not so sort of unripe that it's bitter or it's sour, until it's just so inedible. Even in difficult times, you just can't eat it because it's too bitter, it's too small. Because if it's so unripe, it's so premature, then you don't make a bracha on it whatsoever. Says the Ramah, V'yesh oimrim da'al charuvin on carobs eina mevarech ber pro'etz at sheyir bohen kamin shar sheroish shal charuvin, until you see some sort of streaks or something on the carobs. V'chein bezeisim, and so too with olives, at sheyigdal haneitz sevivam. You only make a bracha of ber pro'etz on an olive when the flowers emerge around the olives. V'kodim lachen mevarech ber priadama. But until that point, before that point, you make a ber priadama v'chein ikka, and that is indeed halacha. Okay, so what have we said? That we treat grapes differently to other fruit. That when it comes to grapes, unripe grapes, you make a ber priadama until it gets to the stage of pul halavan. We don't exactly know what pul halavan is, and therefore, says in the Mechaber, you always make a ber priadama until it becomes gadol b'yoseh. Masha'en kein other fruit. Okay, let's take a look at the Mishnah Berurah. Likpul halavon, says the Mishnah Berurah, Sivkat Yud Aleph begadlei, Yud Beis ber priadama. Now why? The kol davar shegadla le'ilon ve'ein ikka pri ber priadama. Because the bracha is anything, it comes from the ground at the end of the day. You make a ber priadama on it because it does come from the ground, and anything which grows from a tree and it's not the ikka of the pri, then you make a ber priadama. He says here in the note, what we're distinguishing between other fruit and grapes. In other words, with other fruit, as soon as it emerges, you make a ber pri'etz. But when it comes to grapes, you make a ber priadama until the grape is developed. Right? Whenever we get grapes in the stores, they're way past the development stage, and therefore for sure they're ber pri'etz. But if you're going to a vine and you want to pick off some early grapes before they're sort of developed properly, you make a ber priadama. So why is there a chiluk? So he says in note 17, the Tama chiluk ben anovim the shaperis, the reason why there is a difference, sheba anovim ein haboisa nechshav l'ikapri. An unripe grape is not called a proper fruit. Masha'en kein b'shaperis, as opposed to other fruits. Afshem katanim b'yosa nechshavim ke'ikapri. That is the ikapri, a sort of a small, underdeveloped apple is an underdeveloped apple. That's exactly what it is. Like we're going to say later on. What's the chiluk? The main function of a grape is to make wine. And therefore, if it's too premature and it can't make wine, it hasn't got the status of a grape. And therefore, you make a ber priadama. They're designated to make wine. And they've not yet reached the stage of pul halavon. So that's the chiluk. That's why the Mechaber says that a grape, you only make a ber pri'etz when it's developed into a proper grape, the pul halavon stage, or it's gadol b'yoseh, whatever it is. Because its main function is to make wine, and before that point, it's not really considered a grape. It's considered just like a product of the tree, and therefore you make a ber priadama. Okay, carrying on the Mishnah Berurah, and therefore you make This is going on the Machaber, who says that at the very early stage you make a ber priadoma on a grape. Mishum de b'di'evet. Why? Because b'di'evet in berech ber priadoma al prioetz yotza. Because minimally, b'di'evet, if you make a ber priadoma on a ber priotz fruit, you are yotza kedelakam b'simen reish vav. Umikamak b'chgein zeh ein lechol mehem b'shir shechayev bracha achrona. But try and avoid eating very premature, unripe grapes. To the extent that you've had enough of them, 6, 8, 10, I've had not so many, that you would require bracha achrona, because you're going to have a problem. Because if they've got the status of grapes, you make an aloetz. If they've got the status of ber priadoma, of like potatoes, then you make a ber nefashos. And so therefore, says Mishmur, best thing, if you're eating unripe grapes, have them during a meal, and a b'toich hasuda, to avoid that sofek of what the bracha achrona is. Okay, nowadays we're not sure of what pulalovon is, so therefore you only make a ber prior 8 on a grape when they're godel b'yoseh. What does that mean? It says the Mishabur Tesvov, godel b'yoseh, ve'im lefi maris ayin kva nigma b'shulei. If they just from their very appearance, they look like they're developed, ein nafka min klal b'godlei. We're not worried about the size of the grape. You can get fully developed, small, fully developed small grapes. It's not to do with the size, it's to do with the development of the grape. Even though you may have a small grape, but it's fully developed, you for sure make a ber priotz. That if you can see the seeds of the grape from the outside, that's almost certainly that they're ready, they're nearly ripe. So that's one of the sure signs that a grape is developed. If you can see from the outside the seeds which are inside the grape, then for sure they've developed sufficiently. And nowadays most grapes I think are seedless, so it's I don't know how that works exactly. Okay, Mishiyatziya Pri, and okay, so that is talking about grapes. Now, however, in contrast, when it comes to other fruits, as soon as the fruit has emerged, you make the actual bracha of ber priotz. Says Mishabur Tezayin, Afal Gav Shehem Adayin Katanim B'Yoseh. Even though they're very small, you still make a ber priotz. So long as the Mechaber said they're not so bitter or sour, b'yoseh ofut, says the Mishabur, means chomutz. At she'ein aroyin, that you can't eat them. Says the Mishabur Yudches, mevuah mezeh, de'im al kol ponim ne'echolim al edei adchak. If, al edei adchak, you can still eat them, afal gav shechamutzim umarim heim kederech peres bekatnusom, even though they're very bitter and sour like underdeveloped fruit, afilu hachim mevarech aleim berchosim haruya. You still make the bracha of ber priotz. V'chai odem b'cheim b'seif oiles Ephraim pikbu b'dinzeh. They question this. V'daitan the b'chein zein mevarech el shahakol. They actually hold that if they're so unripe, you make a shahakol on these fruit. Imloi bishlan and shemiskon bu'ur, unless you've cooked them to oz mevarech olav ber priotz, then you can, you've added sugar, you made a compote, and the fruit is still recognizable, then you make a ber priotz. Kiven shul pri be'etzem el shetzorach tikkun, because the ma'aseh, they are fruit, it's just that they need a bit of a tikkun, they need a bit of input. Yutes, says the Mishnah Berurah, this is because if they're so bitter, then the Mechaber says ein mevarchim olem klal. Says Rashi, says Mishnah Berurah, the chaetz ba'al mechashav, because they're like wood, they're so underdeveloped. If you take them and you cook them, you do something, even then they're so premature, you make a shahakol. Like you take seeds and you fix them. If you've got very unripe fruits and you cook and you put them in honey and you fry them, when they're very, very unripe, if before you started treating them you couldn't eat them because they're too unripe and they're too bitter, then then you make a shahakal on them. Okay. Now then the Ramah said, and when it comes to carobs, you make a ber priotz. From what point do you make a ber priotz? At what point are they developed enough that you can make a ber priotz on carobs? When the streaks have come through. Says the Mishnah Berurah, Sivkot and Chof, the oz choshev pri, because then it's considered the fruit. Avol kol zeh gam kain davke im lo yimarim b'yoseh. So long as they're not too bitter. If they're too premature, they're too unripe and they're bitter, then you don't make a ber priotz yet. And when it comes to olives, you make a ber priotz on olives when the flower sort of emerges around the olives. That's when you make a ber priotz. That's when they're developed enough. Says the Mishnah Berurah, Chaf Aleph V'chein Hiskim HaMogen Avram V'Hagra V'ayin Shom B'Bir HaGra Shemachmer Od Yosef B'inyan Zeh K'meshe Kasav B'Bir HaLocha. That he wants to wait a little bit longer for when it comes for the development of the olive to make a ber praetz. But prior to that stage, you would make a ber pradoma on olives. Says the Mishnah Berurah, Hainu afilu heimasukim. Even if they're sweet, the adaim enam ikapri. If they're not sufficiently developed, then you would make a ber pradoma on grapes until they get to that stage where they're sufficiently developed, where you make a ber praetz. Say that. Okay, we'll leave it there.